First of all, thanks very much for coming out on what is a very cold evening. I suppose it's spring, certainly not summer, but it's good to be in Perth. I live in Falkland, in Fife, so it's half an hour away, so delighted to do this. And I'm doing a string of meetings because this is a really important issue. I think it impacts on people with your political views, and it impacts on all the political parties, sometimes in different ways, sometimes the parties are mixed. But what I want to just do briefly in maybe 20 minutes and allow us to then get involved in dialogue and discussion is to talk about my perspective first of all, because I'm no neutral observer in this. You know, I'm not going to give you an academic discourse about on the one hand, on the other hand. You know, as Michael Bloomberg said, this is the most monumentally stupid decision that any country has ever taken in the post-war world. And really, that's not just my view or Bloomberg's view. I've been in America for 2 months. I had to come back because I was overdosing on Trump. I was teaching the EU in Texas, and inevitably you listen to a lot of Americans. And despite President Trump, there's a lot of sane Americans who are dismayed, unsettled, bemused by what we're doing in this country. Now, a lot of that, for an audience like this, we're well aware of. So I don't think we want to go too far down. But let me make the case about Brexit. I've never yet met someone who supports Brexit could give me a benefit from leaving. Try it sometimes. It really is embarrassing for the person you're asking, and also for me who's looking for a reply. Because Brexit has been a cause, but they've never had a case. The case is often wrapped up in sentiment, nostalgia, absolute sovereignty of Westminster. What that actually means is that everything must happen at Westminster, or some people are very unhappy. This is an issue, and no disrespect to Conservative members that are here, that this is an issue which has been bubbling up in the Conservative Party since the Thatcher era. This has been a poisonous affair at the heart of a political party. And the sadness for me is it has now spilt over. And that's why we had the referendum. A foolish exercise, because this is never designed to be about the European Union, never designed to be about democracy. I believe intensely that this was an opportunity for a Prime Minister to solve a problem within his own party, and it catastrophically failed and backfired in a way that we cannot recognise. So in that sense, when I hear people say, we've had a referendum, we shouldn't have another vote, I think they're fundamentally wrong, and I'll maybe try and explain why. Because one of the great things about speaking throughout the country is that Brexit has now become so shambolic, both at Westminster and in Europe, that I believe that there is a great opportunity to derail Brexit still and possibly defeat it. And to cheer you up immensely, I think the key to this is the customs union. Because let's remember, leaving the customs union is an act of folly. But what the Conservative government wants to do is to use this to have this fanciful trip around the world to build trade with Duarte in Philippines, Erdogan in Turkey. It doesn't get better. Trump in the USA, Netanyahu in Israel. And of course we do have two other leaders of basically communist countries in Russia and in China. Now we're going to leave the world of the single market, the customs union and the European Union to get involved in an adventure. And that's the kindest thing I can say about where we're actually going. Forget for a minute the absolute sovereignty idea, the sentiment nostalgia. There are too many people in Britain who still think we rule the waves. And there's a large number of people who want us to rule the waves. Now I think none of that. I'm all for sentiment, I'm a Scot, I'm nostalgic. And if you're interested in football as much as I am, you have to be both sentimental and nostalgic. And we love all these qualities. But these should not be qualities that direct the future of a country like the United Kingdom or indeed Britain. So for me, the case is absolute, that there is no case for Brexit. If you dismiss, and I've tried to be reasonably quick on some of those bigger issues, and it's worth making a point, and this is not a nationalist point, but it's a relevant practical point. We did vote to remain, and so did Northern Ireland. But we have a constitution, or lack of one in Britain, which allows Westminster and a government and an executive to do what they want, when they want, without any real effective controls. If we were a federal system, we're getting independence now, if we were a federal system, as the United States is, as Germany, Canada, you give powers to each of the tiers of government, but no one tier has absolute power over the other. And the problem with the Scottish Parliament is we've had many, many powers delegated to us, but we have no real power. Think about it. We have powers to do things on education, and health, and transport, but we have no real power. And this has been exposed by the power grab that Westminster is currently involved in. And ladies and gentlemen, the power grab is not about one parliament taking responsibilities from Brussels. It's even worse than that, because it's about the executive at Westminster, which is the government of Westminster, taking those powers and deciding in maybe 5-7 years' time if we'll get anything back in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So currently it's bogged down in the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Now that's a good thing. And far be it from me, who is no great lover of the House of Lords, well done, House of Lords. You know, they are part of our constitution at the present time, so they have a right in legislation to do what they're actually doing. And you should be cheered, I think, by what's happened over the last few days in terms of rights and in terms of the customs union, because I think, therefore, if we're going to see a big change in the nature of this deal, then it's going to happen at Westminster. So, just going on though, the tragedy of the discussion has been it's all been about trade. You have Brexiteers in the cabinet, like Liam Fox. I cannot describe Boris Johnson because he's undescribable. But these are people who want this Britain to become a kind of offshore tax haven with few regulations, low taxes, low welfare, smacks of being a bit like the United States of America. So trade has been the issue. Make Britain great again. We want to be free. Give our country back. Very reminiscent of the Trumpism in the United States. And my first major point is, let's not dismiss the fact that what's happening at Westminster is very like the populism it's blowing over the rest of Western Europe and the United States. Because remember, the 2016 referendum was fought on the basis of make our country great again, so we'll get rid of everyone in Europe. And secondly, every piece of populism needs a scapegoat. And we found it in abundance, in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of xenophobia, and the picture's clear. What was this referendum actually fought on? Because this is the great democratic dilemma for all of us. We don't have a written constitution, and referenda have become part of our unwritten constitution with no good reason for having them. But we've had one, and 17.4 million people voted to leave. I think 16.1 voted to remain. So everybody says to me, accept it, get back to your day job. The people have spoken. Well, look, if the people of this country have taken such a monumental decision in a false debate, we've every right. And let's not forget, if it had been the other way with Mr. Farage, do you think he would have just decided to go for another cigarette, glass of beer, go back to his day job? I don't think so. Democracy is not about giving up. Democracy is about accepting things at a moment in time. And to me, if you look at a lot of people who voted for leave, as I said earlier, because this was not about the EU, there was no discussion about the EU. It was these fictitious things about, £350 million for the National Health Service will all be great again, English laws for English votes, all of this. But really, when you think about it, the minimum this country deserves is another opportunity to cast a ballot, because we voted for an empty box. The box is slowly being filled up, and it's a pit of bad things that this country is going to endure for the next decade. But I said about the trade issue, but my Europeanism is about, I've been a member of the Labour Party for far too long, it would be embarrassing me to tell you, but we're internationalists, as people are here, as the other political parties, and this is all about internationalism. I believe our future is in the EU, And then since 73, we've been part of that. It was started in 1958. And when people say, what has the EU ever done for you? The great thing for us, as a nation that starts to really miss out on history, the EU was formed, the EEC, the EC, the EU was formed to reflect on a Europe that had been virtually destroyed by war. 1870, 1914, 1939. And a lot of leaders with vision decided, like Churchill at that time, not again in our name. So what we established there was 6 countries coming together with the 2 main protagonists, France and Germany, joining up to make sure armaments were controlled, so coal and steel was taken into common ownership of 6 countries. And then we went from 6 to 28. And in that time, there had been no wars within the boundaries of the European Union. NATO was a part in that, of course. And of course, American investment in the Reconstruction had a part. But imagine if somebody had said in 1945 that we would have 73 years without a war within the boundaries of Europe. That to me is sufficient justification itself to say what an unbelievable success the European Union has. And as Churchill once said, rather than war, war, jaw, jaw. Simple concept, but it's worked. And in addition to that peace, we've had security, stability, and a sense of solidarity. So I say to myself, why then, and I'm shaking my head, so I won't shake my head tonight, but I'm shaking my head when I'm saying, why do we want to sacrifice all of that? So this debate should have been, and it can still be, not only about trade, but about internationalism. The idea of common purpose. The idea in a world which is very, very troubled at the present time, there is strength. 507 million people, single market, customs union, and we're working together on many, many fronts. So essentially, that's what we are about to throw away. And I do, ladies and gentlemen, find it absurd that the government believe that they should get a deal out with the membership of the EU that they had within the membership of the EU. It's striking in its stupidity, but it also, I think, reflects the naivety of the arguments that are being made. So where are we? Well, clearly the House of Lords is doing its bit just now. The government always threaten, and of course Rees-Mogg, you know, they refer to him in the House of Commons as the member for the 18th century. Very fitting, no disrespect to him. He fought against me, He'd love it, so I mean, he'd be happy with it. He came to fight, I was in Central Fife constituency, and that was my parliamentary constituency, so he was sent up to just kind of get into the warfare of a strong Labour seat. And I remember it was his first time. Of course, his father is the editor of the Times, very distinguished editor of the Times. And so, in places like Methil in Fife, if you know Methil Hill, my home area, I used to give him protection. A Conservative candidate in what I regard as one of the smartest parts of Scotland. Some people may differ, but nevertheless, I gave him all that protection. And at the end of it, his father, the editor of the Times at that time, said, "Mr. McLeish, thank you very much. I don't normally write, basically, to Labour MPs, but thank you for looking after Rees-Mogg." And I think when I look at it now, God, did I do the country a favor? But anyway, so we have that situation. So the House of Lords is doing a good job. The government, I think, are shaking a bit on the idea, because Theresa May, I think, sometimes has got to deliver her credentials. I cannot believe you can go from a Remainer to being the adjunct to support some of the madness that is going on within her cabinet. There's also another big issue, and that's the Labour Party. It's no surprise I often fall out with my own party, but I've been a member for nearly 50 years. I was brought up in a very working class family with a kind of socialist grandmother and an evangelical socialist grandfather. I love the party more than I've ever done, partly because there's a lot of work to be done. Now, every party can look at people who are in it and they might have something to say. But the point is, let's be honest, if the Labour Party had had an effective campaign in 2016, we would not be where we are today. And I would like people from other parties to respect that as an objective view, because we did not have a campaign. There was mixed messages. There's confusion from the top. And at the end of the day, a campaign is to be an education as well as a political campaign. So I just feel that was point one. The second point then, if the Labour Party, who have now committed themselves to a customs union, decide to stiffen that up and want to remain within the customs union of the European Union at the present time, that would be a big step forward. But secondly, if you look at the composition of the Labour Party, it's young people, it's trade unionists, it's voters, it's members, it's supporters. We all want to remain. So, what is the issue? Well, the issue has to be the leadership have to change. Or the party has to change the thinking of the leadership. And I believe passionately, if the Labour Party would come full square behind the European movement and the other political parties, then quite frankly, a massive derailment can take place in the House of Commons. Because I think now there's sufficient Conservative MPs. And I also want to just maybe strike a point. We have 13 Scottish Conservative MPs. Now, Theresa May brought in 13 DUP members to give her a majority. So let's just switch that about. The 13 Scottish Conservative MPs are Theresa May's majority. She cannot govern without them. So, does that not give the 13 Scottish Conservative MPs enormous power and leverage? So my question tonight is that being used? Because at the end of the day, the DUP, let's just not go into the DUP, akin to the Tea Party in the United States when it existed. But here we have an opportunity where, first of all, Labour should commit itself to a campaign not only for the customs union, but to go even further to remain. Secondly, and this is a Scottish dimension, 13 Conservative MPs in Scotland are Theresa May's majority. If they decided that they wanted a customs union, or the single market, or to be tougher, that would not only be in the interest of Scotland, who voted to remain, but it would be in the interest of the United Kingdom. The third point is that in terms of the Liberals, Lib Dems, the Greens, the SNP, other parties, they have rightly, for maybe different reasons, want to be passionate about staying in the European Union. But I do think it hangs on my party saying to itself, this is a historic moment over the next year, and we have to do something that most of us support within the Labour Party, that the leadership may have concerns about. Now, leadership should be about leadership. It should be about vision. And this is an opportunity for the Labour Party to put maybe narrow sectional interests above the public interest, something I believe that the Conservative, part of the Conservative government is not currently doing. So I'm optimistic that that can be done, but it does need a campaign to carry on to make these points as we go along. Because let's look at the issues. Theresa May has this week said it will be a meaningful vote the MPs will have to be able to amend this madness and to make it look at least sellable and maybe have some sanity towards it. Let's see if that happens. Secondly, when they go through the committee stages, the further committee stages of the bills in the House of Commons, then there'll be a lot of stuff from the House of Lords which will either have to be accepted or thrown back to them. The European Parliament will have a vote. And let's remember the other important thing, this is why we need to keep the pressure up. The divorce bill, which is essentially the border in Northern Ireland, the citizenship issue, and the amount of money, the 50 billion we've got to pay back, that's handled by the European Council. That's a vote that the European Council will take, and that's the 28 presidents and prime ministers. That's phase one. And of course, that hasn't been settled yet. But secondly, and this is what we've got to remember, if we move on to a future relationship with the EU, then in trade, every country of the 27 will have a say on that. So if you look ahead, I'm not a betting man, but look at the Grand National course ahead of you. There are many, many obstacles that this government's got to hurdle over, and I think they're going to fail at many of them. There's a political mood in the country, although the opinion polls don't reflect that the move from leave to remain is very small. But I'm not sure, and I'm not convinced by the opinion polls, partly because they don't suit my argument this evening, but on the other hand, let's be kind to them and say there is a movement towards Remain, but it's not going to be substantial enough to be able to say that the country has changed its mind. So I believe at this point there is a remarkable amount of work still to be done to keep pressure on the MPs, but also to take it to the country. Because whilst there was a big vote in Scotland to remain, there was a very sizable number of people in Scotland who voted to leave as well. And politically, my view about the left behind, this is the Trumpism in America, in places like Ohio, Pennsylvania. A lot of people in those areas voted for Trump. But actually they didn't vote for Trump. They voted against the other party, and they were fed up being taken for granted. And since the crisis in 2008, 2009, there's been a lingering legacy of who can I take it out of. People have had not a wage increase for 10 years. This is a disgruntled, grudge and grievance part of America who voted. And to me, the big issue was, what are the Democrats doing anyway? And did they deserve to win? Come over here. There's a lot of people in the north of England who have had enough. So in a way, the hook was the EU. But as I said earlier, it was every other problem that we have in the United Kingdom. And, you know, there was Neil Aitchison, who was Secretary of State in 1962 in America. I mean, he really upset Harold Macmillan at that time, because at that point he said, in 62, you know the problem with Britain? It lost an empire, but has not yet found a role. Still doing it. You know, we still think that we're wearing top hats and we're wondering about the world and everybody wants our opinions. We do have a lot of clout in the world, but it's not the clout that will take us back to Iraq, or take us back to Syria, or want to walk, you know, with the top people in the world, so-called. This is a Britain that's got problems of inequality, problems of climate change, massive problems in terms of wages, the, you know, AI happening. All of that is currently being ignored because of the distraction. So I think this issue about Britain looking for a role, yes, our role is to be at the heart of Europe. And since the Churchill speech, 1946 in Zurich, when he talked about the United States of Europe, Churchill started this ambivalence because he said at that point, you know, he first time to use the United States of Europe in a speech by anyone. But then what happened was, he then qualified it by saying, but the mighty Russia, the great America, the Commonwealth and Britain will really act as cheerleaders. So from that particular point on, there was always an ambivalence hanging over us in Britain. That's one of the reasons why we had a public that had virtually no idea what was happening in the European Union. And of course, when the campaign came, it was easy to kind of knock it over. So I believe, and I remain very optimistic, that we're going to make real progress on this. The stakes are very, very high. And I, for one, although my hair is greying, I want to be active for a long time. It is the point that we will spend the next 20 years trying to deal with the consequences of a Brexit decision that was taken in 2016. Final point, Northern Ireland. There is no solution to the Northern Ireland question apart from being part of the customs union. And the biggest solution would be if the whole of the UK was part of the customs union, you wouldn't have that issue on the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Now, think of all the effort that John Major, Blair, and a lot of people put in to getting the peace process completed, and the situation where Sinn Féin and the Ulster Unionists could actually be First Minister and Deputy First Minister after everything that went on. Now, what the hell are we trying to do here? Because one of the consequences will be that they will have a border, and that, I think, will set back Northern Ireland considerably. Because if you've been to Northern Ireland, it's vibrant, it's positive, it's moving ahead, and that's the way we want to see it. But there's another issue. The demographics of Northern Ireland are changing. In the next 20 years, there may well be a parity between the Catholic and Protestant populations. Now, it was always believed that once that demographic started to shift in favour of the Catholic community, that would be the opportunity for another look at the United Ireland. Because remember, let's go back to the 1920s, 32 counties, 6 in Northern Ireland were kept within the United Kingdom, and 26 formed the Republic. But the other problem might be that the Brexit deal, or no deal, might reignite the national Irish question. And is this what Theresa May wants? Is this a price worth paying? Not only do you have a border established between the north and the south of Ireland, you then open up or ignite the idea of a united Ireland. Second point, finish with this, is our own Scotland. Now, we had a referendum in 2014, 55 to 45 said we would like to stay in the United Kingdom. But interestingly, the supermarket deal at that time was, if you buy into the UK, you get Europe free. Buy one, get one free. That should be familiar. All the men should nod, because if you don't, it means that you're not shopping. But this buy one, get one free thing was good, because if you stayed in the UK, you stayed in the European Union. Now the narrative has completely changed. If there is a future referendum, and there will be a future referendum, time unknown, questions unknown, nature of it unknown, but there will definitely be another referendum sometime on the constitutional question. Now, people might have a right to say then, well, look, I voted to stay in the UK because I'm a European as well. Now, the dilemma for some Scots will be, that's not now the choice. The choice is, we're out of the UK, so if I vote to stay in the UK, it will be a UK only. Now, I think nobody expected Brexit of its own, the mere vote in June of 2016, to change, that Scotland would want to be this, that and the other overnight. That was not sensible. But the position now is, one, that could happen in the sense that people could rethink. Secondly, I'm a great believer in federalism. I'd have to be an ultra-optimist to think we could move Westminster to that position, but at least it's a good political position to be. Can that happen? And thirdly, then, if we do have another referendum in Scotland, my advocacy is that Scots deserve a wider choice, and that referendum would not necessarily be on, a binary vote on yes or no to the UK, but could be a multi-choice option, difficult to arrange, but so the ballot paper would look about federalism, it would look at independence. But the reason I argue for that is, in my view, and this is maybe a sentimental view, the United Kingdom's changing, and I don't like it. I was in America for 2 months. That's a savagely divided country now. I've been going there for 30 years. I've never seen America so divided. So, in the referendum here, it spiked a lot of things. And I don't want racism and xenophobia and economic nationalism. I don't want people to be saying, let's make Britain great again. I'd like to see the people of all the 4 countries, not great again, but actually be able to live without going to food banks, to see some wage rises in their pockets, and also have the dignity of having a health service that's more invested in, and an education service that is more financed as well. So the next part of Scotland's debate is not, in my view, just a narrow focus on the nationalism of the 2014 vote, but the question for all of you will be, what kind of Scotland? Would we like it to be the 51st state of the Union of the US? Slight hyperbole there, but you get the drift of what I'm suggesting. Or is it a Scandinavian model or a Nordic model? Does Scotland want to look at what kind of country it can be? Because in a way, at 5.6 million population, there are more choices open to Scotland now than there are open to the United Kingdom with 66 million. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was a quick flurry through some of the things I think are the big issues and the ideas, and I'd be delighted now to engage with you in conversation and anything else you would want to throw at me. Thanks very much. I was trying to resist my cynicism this evening, but I'm happy to respond. Well, look, let's take the objective view first of all, that John Major and the Conservative Party in their years in office did a remarkable amount up front and behind the scenes. And when the government that I was in came in 97, Blair completed that process, but I'd like to give equal measure to John Major in that. I would like to think, in terms of the common good idea of politics or the ethical side of politics, that the Conservative Party or the Conservative government would not want to see that as a price that they would be worth paying to create that position. Because if you start to do that, you can look at Scotland. A lot of people, when we were doing devolution, we took the bill through the House of Commons in 1998, there's no great enthusiasm in England for devolution, or in Westminster, or amongst Conservative MPs, and it could have extended further. And the view then became, well, if the Conservative Party in England didn't have all the Labour troops coming from Scotland to vote against them, life would be a lot easier. Now, I'd like to think that as a reasonably non-cynical person, I wouldn't want either the Northern Ireland issue or the Scotland issue to be viewed through those particular terms. But what I will say is that forget about what Westminster attitude might be. Westminster may be unleashing forces over which it has no control. And the thing I mentioned about populism, if you look at Europe just now, Europe's very troubled. Macron won in France. You've got Germany, you've got the alt-right. 20% of the population voted for a fascist party. And in the last place, ladies and gentlemen, you don't want fascists to be walking, it's Germany. If you look at Turkey, if you look at Poland and Hungary just now, populism is rampant. Mercifully, it's been restrained. I mean, Austria has a right-wing government now, but they want to be part of the EU. So it doesn't necessarily mean if you're right-wing, you want to come out of the European Union. But all of this is bubbling up. So in a sense, nothing can be taken for granted in the next 5 or 10 years. And this is when I think people should be careful when they say, well, 214 it was 55-45. 48-52 when we got to 216 in the referendum. People are very volatile. I meet a lot of people who are angry. There's a lot of grudges around, a lot of grievance. And think about it rationally. The people that gave Trump victory, the debate in America is, I think, settled on the view that he was a consequence of the vacuum that politics had created. And he has exploited well modern communications. But a lot of people who voted in there, and I believe a lot of people who voted for Brexit, they've had enough of some of this stuff that they see as normal politics. Because politics is not necessarily there to improve the economic good, but it's part of that. And I meet a lot of people in my own constituency, my former constituency, in places like Methil and that. We have more food banks than we've ever had in Scotland. Part of the food bank culture. Why is it? Why have people not had a wage increase for 10 years? I'm sorry, but these are what ordinary people think, to use that phrase. And basically, the similar in America, they were rejecting something. And an interesting, just digress slightly, but there was the Washington Post had had a special election in part of Pennsylvania, and Trump got defeated. But anyway, they interviewed some people, and they said in this interview, this Trump supporters, well, what do you think of your man? He said, oh, fantastic leader. He's done everything he said he would do. Great leader. He's one of us. And then he said, well, what about him as a human being? And that's where I have to stop, because I can't tell you what they said, because it's unprintable and untransferable. Now, hang on a minute. We used to think that, ethics, morality, all of that would be part of the same decisions and discussions you'd make. No, that's all changing. And so, really, sir, what I'm saying is that I'd like to think that there will be a positive consideration for Northern Ireland and Scotland, and it wouldn't be a question of, they want to make Britain again. I would hate to see that become just make England great again, and parts of Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland to be sacrificed as a consequence. So I have strong views on all of that, but it's very volatile, and anybody who can predict the next 10 years in Scotland, Northern Ireland, or in Britain is going to be a brave person. Macron has a vision, and Angela Merkel's been having some problems getting a government. Well, first of all, in March of 2017, the European Commission produced a discussion document which gave 5 alternatives. I mean, it wasn't a great discussion document. It was kind of cobbled up, and it was kind of, we stay together, we live together, we love together, all that kind of stuff. But basically, as you know, with the 28 countries just now, 19 of them are in the Eurozone. And there's an urgency on behalf, I think, of the Germans at times, the French, the Dutch and other people, that they would like to be going faster. And so I think one of the dangers is that you have a two-speed Europe, that the Eurozone will intensify. They will move towards some federal structure, because currently the Eurozone has economic powers in the European Central Bank, but it really doesn't have any political powers. So that would be 19 out of the 27 of Britain left. The other issue that they're talking about is that there's another 10 or 12 countries that are lining up to join the EU. Some of them are long-termers, like Turkey, who on current form won't make it. A lot of the Balkan countries are trying to make it. So the issue then becomes one, do we stall integration, expansion, extending the boundaries of Europe, and concentrate more on deepening rather than widening? But I think the third debate is, there is a general view, and this is where the tragedy of Britain comes. Britain has always been an ambivalent, on-the-side member of the European Union, under both political parties. The third option would be to have a close look at the European Union, to see that, has there been too much centralisation? Are there things that the countries can do without undermining the single market, the customs union, and all the other positive things that are in the EU? And that's where I would like to see Britain remain, because if we were less ambivalent, use the natural skills that Britain has, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, we could help influence the EU. But for the last 70, well not 70, but for the time we've been in, that's 45 years, we really haven't contributed to that debate. Parties have been on the sidelines, and often it's been the case, if Europe does something good, we're happy to take the credit for it. If Europe does something bad, we're happy to blame them for it. And this is how it's gone on. So I don't think there's a current direction we're moving in, but that I think is the nature of the debate. And the other thing about Macron's visit to America, I mean, hey, very interesting. But on the other hand, this is more, I think, about Macron's positioning of France sentiment and nostalgia, and also about where France might want to be in the European Union. But on the other hand, in a sensible way, let's not forget that the French and Germans who were involved in the wars in those 3 years I described have become the backbone of the European Union. And I would be happier if it was France, Germany and the United Kingdom that were helping to have a dialogue, a discussion to take the European Union forward. But one thing hasn't happened, sir, is this, that they thought that once Britain gave a nod to the door, other countries would follow. Now, if other countries were taken over by some of the political parties that are aspiring to power, that would happen. But currently, they are staying pretty closely together. And to me, that's an endorsement of difficult times, but nevertheless, people can see the benefits. Well, on your federalism one, I mean, I have been harping on about federalism now for near a decade. I was looking at one of the books we'd written with Tom Brown, who's former editor of the Daily Record, and we talked about federal structure. That was way back in 2005. You know, federalism makes a lot of sense. You have to accept that you're still part of the United Kingdom. That's what a federal state would be. But what it would mean is that point I said earlier, that my judgment is the Scottish Parliament has no political, constitutional, or European powers. And I think that's been laid bare by the discussion and the dialogue we've had. Under federalism, if you take the United States, for example, the federal government has powers, and the states, the 50 of them, have powers, but the federal government doesn't pass these powers down. It comes from a written constitution, and it comes from the people. So in that context, Westminster could not do what it's doing to us, or doing to Northern Ireland, or doing to Wales. So federalism is well short of independence. But on the other hand, I pose this question. Since 2007, the SNP have been in government, and I have no criticism of that. That's 11 years. But since 2014 in the referendum, there's been 82 opinion polls, and they still show the needle between 40 and 50%. Most of the needle is at the 40% level and just above. So that's why I'd like to see a bigger debate, so that Scots who want to have independence have the say, and they've had a big say. People who want to stay in the UK maybe need another option. Because my view is that the current powers that we've got, White Paper in 1997, Scotland Act, and then 2 other Scotland Acts, we could see that in terms of the power grab debate, we've really no powers. Westminster says jump, eventually you jump, because they're so centralised in their thinking. And if we could achieve some form of federal structure, that would help. The other thing you posed about Westminster, now Westminster's been there for a long time, and I was there for 14 years. It's very much London-centred. That's where it's based. It doesn't have any big vision of the architecture of a different kind of United Kingdom. And federalism isn't even on the radar screen. Thirdly, it has no big notion of having a written constitution. Because whilst I'm very critical of the US, I admire there's only 4 countries, I think, in the world. I think Kazakhstan, Israel, the UK, and New Zealand. We're the only countries that don't have a written constitution. Now, the view at Westminster is, well, we make it up as we go along. That would be terrible to have something that would bind us to things that we don't want. And to me, that's a nonsense. So the modernisation of the Westminster, the modernisation of the United Kingdom, go hand in hand with any changes that should be post-Brexit. And I have become quite right. I mean, people talk about the House of Lords. I mean, without being too involved in class, you have to look at the House of Lords, and you've got a lot of brilliant people in there, especially in recent times. But was set up as a hereditary chamber. It was there to do certain things in terms of legislation. Now, what about the notion that if there was a move towards federalism, the House of Lords in its current form would cease, and the benches would be used for Scots and Irish and Welsh and England, and if they wanted, the English regions. So what you would have then would be an elected second chamber, and then people say, well, that would undermine the power of the House of Commons. Yes, good. Because if you look at other countries, we've got a political system like America. Despite the fact there are multi-parties, there are only 2 parties in Britain, in a sense, and 2 parties in America. And it's become the politics of extremes. Not extremism, but extremes. I mean, in American Congress, they don't talk to each other. They're elected for 4 years, 2 years, 4 years, and 6 years. It becomes part of a huge, huge game. Now, the danger is in the United Kingdom, we can't get change of the radical kind that we've spoken about. And that's why other parties should be given support, and then force the big parties to think more radically than they are. But my depressive final note on the question is, it's quite a rarefied atmosphere inside the Houses of Parliament. You could be anywhere. And this is the danger, that all of the things that are going on around us are not interpreted too seriously, and we just stumble on, and we stumble on. Then we're waking up to Northern Ireland, we're waking up to Scotland. And the word I use these days is, Brexit is about creating a lesser Britain. We're diminishing ourselves abroad, we're diminishing ourselves at home, and in many countries we're actually becoming a laughing stock by some serious critics who think we've taken leave of our senses. Well, I think the Labour Party should try and change its opinion, because John MacDonald and Jeremy Corbyn were both in House, they're in the same time as me, I was in the House of Commons. And, people by instinct, by interest, by experience, have their views and visions and values shaped. Now, I don't think Jeremy is a great enthusiast about European Union, I'm stating the very obvious. But also, he made great play of having the biggest membership of any political party in Europe. True. But that political party has shown an interest in supporting Jeremy for leadership, which is one issue. But he, I think, now needs to listen to even some of the big trade unions. Younger people in the vote showed they wanted to remain, and they've shown that ever since. And then if you take voters, and then we have a problem in the northeast of England because there's a lot of shakiness about the fact that so many Labour voters voted to leave. But I think they voted to leave for entirely the reasons that I've talked about. And what they need is an economic package that will actually redistribute wealth, tackle inequality, and do the things that I've talked about. So I believe that should be stepped up. And Keir Starmer, I think, would be very keen to be there. And what could happen here is that, politics is always looking for an edge and an opportunity. And I think if the Lord does the business, if the Conservative MPs who are rebelling do the business, then Jeremy Corbyn, because look, at the end of the day, if for any reason, in my view, that Parliament votes down us leaving the customs union as a minimum, that could be a resignation issue. Because you cannot treat the country to 2 years of saying you support no deal and bad deals, and eventually. So the stakes are really high, and that's why I think that Corbyn might want to look further, because there's no way I think the Conservative government can carry on in the shaky way it is already if on a major policy issue in Europe they're defeated. And I think the customs union would be part of it. The second box would be the single market, and the third box would be the question of retaining their membership of all of the parts of the European Union which are good for Britain. So if she fails on all of these issues, or one of them, then I think politically, and this is where Corbyn, to be cynical about it, has to look at the opportunities that lie ahead. Possibly staying in the European Union in some form, a general election, and then we'll see what happens after that. Well, first of all, I'll answer that, but I think first of all, what I've been trying to do is, with the Herald and some of the other newspapers, I constantly remind them, because after the election, they tended to forget that the pendulum had swung. With 7 Labour MPs, 13 Conservative MPs, and of course 37 SNP. And I kept saying to some of the newspapers, what about the fabulous 13 that we've just sent to Westminster? No criticism intended, because what are they doing? And then I reminded them, that the DUP have 13, and that's Theresa May's majority. So let's switch the majorities. So I'm trying to do that. But the second thing you could maybe do is, and I don't know whether you can do it as an organisation without being too obvious, that you just keep inviting MPs of the Conservative Party in Scotland to appear. And if they don't appear, they may have things on, but if after a bit of pressing they don't appear, then quite frankly, what you should be doing is there could be some press statements. Now, it's not a matter of being personally abusive, but this is a thing in politics where people are going to stand up and be counted. And my fear is that the Conservative, as I said, I'm trying to make this reasonably neutral without offending Conservative people here, that they have got off lightly so far since their election, but they can't hide forever, and I'd like to see the spotlight on them, only to say, Scotland voted to remain, you're Theresa May's majority, what are you going to do about this? And I believe that some of them may, because as we get nearer to the crunch, then we'll find out how they're actually voting. And the series of votes on the Article 50, the Lord's Amendments and whatever, people will put their names down when they go through the lobbies, and that would be the time for the media and the rest of the Scottish population to hit them hard. Well, I think you're always, if people write to you as an MP, of course, and if you get 2 or 3 on an issue, well, that's fine. But if you get 30 or 40 people writing, not necessarily as a sign this motion type thing, then that has, because see, in politics, no matter what the political colour is, you have a right. You vote for people, and whether you vote for the person who actually won is immaterial. The person should be responsible to you, because at the end of the day, if I go to Westminster, go to the Scottish Parliament, I realise you're shaking your head, and I understand the shaking of the head, but see, I work on the principle that the electors are sovereign, in a sense, so therefore that might be an old-fashioned view. But when I was 40 years at Westminster, and then 14 years in Fife Council, 4 years in Scottish Parliament, I actually acted that out. And we had big debates on abortion, things like that, in the Catholic Church. We're sending a massive number of letters, we had a dialogue with courteous expectation. Because at the end of the day, you might not change their votes if they're going to vote to leave or have no deal at all. On the other hand, they have to be accountable. And it's trying to think of every conceivable way that can be done. Well, I still think, physically, personally, you've got to keep the pressure on. Because see, what has happened over the last decade, and it comes back to the point the gentleman made, a lot of politics has just drifted, you know, and the real tragedy of, I speak to a lot of people just now, and they're so fed up with politics, and Brexit, and life, they're just disenchanted and they're turning off. Now, this is for me the time to turn on. And whilst it's frustrating to do what you've been doing, I think writing to the media is also helpful because they've got to be made accountable. And this idea that you know, when I was in the House of Commons for 14 years, and whips are ferocious. I mean, whips are not, in the main, kind of normal people. They're really tough. And then, you know, they sit there and whatever, you better be at this vote and whatever. But look, I personally believe that politics is going to have to change. Because where is the common ground or the common good in what we do? Why do we have to kick the hell out of each other on issues that most of us agree? The Scottish Parliament, 90% of everything that's going on in the Scottish Parliament, everybody agrees with it. It's the same at Westminster. But we're in this corrosive system of extremes that I'm here, you're there, and you look at the European situation now, coalitions don't necessarily make good government, but they speak to each other. Wow. How interesting. They cooperate. They have coalitions. They have different parties in government. When you look back from the continent to Britain, what a primitive setup we are. I mean, it's really primitive. And this is for all, against all parties and for no party. And that's the longer term prospect for me, that politics. Now, people can say, well, you didn't think like that when you were in. Absolutely. I remember being on Labour's benches, it was like being at Hampden Park. You know? I won't repeat some of the things that we would be saying, but it's just ferocious. Now, we hoped in the Scottish Parliament some of that would disappear. It has. But there's still a tribalism. There's still an extremes issue in politics. And to me, if you look at Brexit, calmly and coldly, you arrive from outer space, say Mercury, you arrived here. And what we're really saying is that we could vote for something. And what's the debate? We just want to leave. Oh, but that could mean 50 years of amazing hardship for your country. Oh, I don't mind. I don't mind. Nobody told me about that at the time. I just want to leave. Now, what kind of politics is this that we're involved in? So I think politics has got to grow up. I think politics, to capture the point you've made, politics has got to say there has to be a coming together, because apart from Brexit, look at some of the big issues that divide the country and need to be tackled. And we're not tackling them. And the fact is, if we can't get together, and that's why we're talking about federalism, I'd like to see first past the post disappear. I mean, interestingly, only in the British Parliament. Scottish Parliament, oh yeah, you can have it, because Westminster doesn't regard you as that important. But at Westminster, we'll keep first past the post. And then you've got the House of Lords. And then you've got the fact that there's coalitions. We had a vote in 2014 or 2012 about an alternative vote system. There was no campaign about that. The poor Liberals will hang out to dry on that. No progress was made. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's about this idea that politics, apart from Brexit, politics has to change. There has to be a kind of new politics, to use a much overused phrase. But at the end of the day, I just fear that Britain is going to become lesser and lesser and lesser, if that's grammatically correct, and will just keep diminishing. And we will be part of it. And this is what could happen. Northern Ireland have choices, Scotland have choices, and that could be the result of us carrying on as we are. What will happen to them? Well, I mean, I think that issue hasn't been settled. But there was a calmer influence around, because some debate had taken place about our citizens in Europe and 3.5 million in Britain. But the Caribbean issue is really worrying, because it's often what you don't know in politics. But you have a government there who wanted a kind of fiery policy about migrants. And that can result then in the kind of consequences we saw for the Caribbeans. Now, the big problem for the 3.5 million coming from Europe is, who's the final arbiter of their position? And if you're a European just now in Britain, then you might be quite concerned about what's going on in the Home Office. And if you get a fixed, if you have an ability to remain, as it were, in Britain with all the conditions, fine. But can the government be trusted? And this is my fear, that it's a tough enough subject at the present time with the Caribbean, and it's quite clear now that this is going to go much wider. It's just not people from the Caribbean countries. It could be further parts of the old empire, the old colonies, that could come into focus. So they're rightly anxious. And to me, I don't see any reason, if it's a partnership, and everybody's looking, we want to leave the EU, but we want partnership, if you listen to Liam Fox. Well, why don't you have a partnership with the European Court of Justice as an extreme with the British courts? And that would be the arbiter, but not leaving it to Britain after we leave to be the adjudicator for 3.5 million Europeans who are in this country. If I was one of them, I would not be happy about that. And that's one of the issues, this constant thing that ECJ, we must abandon that at all costs. And quite frankly, unlike the Supreme Court of America, they do a great job in a very non-political way. Remembering that only 17%, this is the House of Commons Library, a great research facility, only something like 17% of all the laws of Britain are actually made in Europe. So it is a major problem, and I'm concerned about that. But that's one of the first three issues that have not been settled yet, and we've got a few months to go. Well, I mean, it's a big question, and when I was in America recently, this was the time when they had the gun issue in Florida, and I spoke up in Denver to the school kids were marching that day, so I was up in Denver the last couple of months at Columbine, where they had that massacre of school kids, and I was speaking to them and saying, look, we need a better, different kind of politics, because the gun issue in America is completely, they're on another planet, and there's just no debate. But what I was talking to them was about the various things. They kept saying, well, what do we do? And the first thing I said to them was, well, they were 17, well, they were 18, 19, 20-ish, some 16. How many of you vote? There wasn't really a sea of hands went up. So what I tried to do was practical things with them and say, look, you need to vote, you need to do this, and you see that. And of course, younger people have that much kind of, WTF about them in terms of what they say and what they do. But coming back here, I do think that people need to talk this up. We're having we're having a conference on federalism. Mark Lazarovich is kind of Labour people, but it's to start that debate up, because part of that is not just about a structure, it's about the kind of politics you feed into that structure. I do think the press are important. I do think the European movement is absolutely crucial. But on the other hand, who stands for politics is another one. Most people have lives to lead, but the other thing is that because politics can become quite constrained, quite limited as far as membership is concerned, we need to open up that. Now, you have to join a political party to make progress in this country as you do in the United States. So there's a number of avenues, but what I'm trying to preach just now, I suppose, is some coherent idea that unless we change, Britain will be diminished. It will be a lesser Britain. It will be a Britain where big issues are not being tackled. It will become a more unequal Britain. It will become this, that, and other. And we've got to get to the point where that debate within here has a bigger debate. I'm sorry if that doesn't sound specific, but if you regard that 1707 to 1998, we had administrative power from Westminster and nothing else. That was nearly 300 years. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have a re-meet in 300 years' time and we have a chat about it, but these things are just immensely difficult. And I just think that Britain has slid so far that the UK's composition and its structure is now at risk. And as part of that, we need to have another look at our politics. And that means within political parties, but between political parties and the big institutions. That's the debate, but how it garners support and momentum is more. Well, I mean, I've written recently that the voice of England through the Westminster Parliament crowds out everything else, because it has no Parliament, so therefore it looks like, and some of them think that Westminster is their Parliament. You'll find fewer Scots that think Westminster, or fewer Welsh, or fewer Irish that would think that. So, but to me, there's two options. I mean, one is you can have a very disproportionate federalism where you have England with 50 odd million and the other three countries there. It can work. The other idea, of course, is you create some federalism within the English regions. But if you notice over the last 5 or 6 years, decade, that no one seems interested in England, so it's powers for cities, powers for administrative cities, it's strengthen local government, everything except trying to give a voice. And way back in 1998, the Scottish legislation went through. John Prescott was in charge of all of this at Westminster, and I don't know if you remember, but there was a referendum held in the northeast of England.
The powerhouse.
Yeah, well, that was a powerhouse, but it was also to have some kind of federal nature to it, and that was just massively defeated because, again, no one was quite interested. So I think that is the issue. But I'd like to see England with a parliament, because there are distinctive English issues. You know, at the end of the day, if you have a federal parliament, what they would handle would be macroeconomic issues in terms of maybe high economics. They would deal with foreign affairs, and they would deal with Europe. But on the other hand, these two latter ones could then be shared with other parts, and England could have that. On the other hand, it's hard to get over how remote Westminster is from all of this, because, you know, to me, an English Parliament seems like a reasonable deal, or regional assemblies. It could be part of the UK setup in a federal thing. But Westminster's not there. Well, that's a fair argument. I mean, but in the sense that there's going to be a bit of movement recently, because they're about to spend a vast amount of billions of our expenditure to tidy the place up. No, I mean, I do. I mean, see, the point about this is not so much this is an argument for Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. This is an argument about the good governance of England and the good governance of Britain. You think part of the debate in Scotland is about independence. Wales, it's not about independence. Ireland, it's much more complicated. But nobody talks about improving the governance. You're talking about getting to your MPs and getting your views over. Nobody talks about governance, and it seems to me the big debate in the future: do I want to be governed by a Westminster that behaves and acts as it does? No. A lot of people would say no. But then you have to say to yourself, okay, you can change the structures. Fine. We could have independence, we could have federalism. But that again doesn't change everything, because it's the mood of the country. And I just think historically, I said at the start, this was not a debate about the European Union. This is a debate about the state of Britain in 2016. And a lot of people rejected, to me, not Europe, but the state of Britain at that particular point. And this is where they can. Well, it comes back to the change question again. I mean, see, one of the things that the media can do is they can undermine the whole concept of political representation. We're at Westminster, we're in the Scottish Parliament, of course you've got to be accountable. You see, I just believe intrinsically. I remember when Tony Blair did his last speech, or his last contribution in the House of Commons before he retired. He talked about politics in this general way. He said, look, a lot of people think that politics is low skullduggery. Other people think it's noble virtue. And he'd like to concentrate on the noble virtuous side. But that requires a better appreciation, because the more we dumb down politics, the more the right-wing newspapers undermine what politicians do, all of them, then you're it's a lesser politics. And so therefore you want to attract people who might have in their 30s or their 40s, have children, a nice family, whatever. Would you want to get into this? So how do you attract a different kind of people, not a different kind of people, but a broader cross-section of life into politics? And the second thing is then that if it's a noble virtue, which it should be, because at the end of the day, society, since we formed societies, had to get away. I mean, politics is essentially trying to rationalise all the views in this room, all the views on this planet, 7 billion of them, and try to come to some agreement on how we can live decently and harmoniously. So the simple ideas of politics are very sound, but we seem to have lost completely the notion. So it's political wars that we fight. And in America, I mean, if you've been recently, I mean, it's completely crazy. I mean, it's completely crazy. Resulting in an incident where one of the Arizona senators, John McLeish, he's got brain cancer, and he may or may not have much time ahead. And he was a Vietnam War veteran. He was imprisoned in Vietnam for 5 years, and Trump, speaking to a conservative group, mocked him. Because what he had done was he had screwed up Trump's attempts to undermine Obama in the healthcare issue. Now, mocking a war veteran like John McCain was bad enough, but all the audience joined in, clapping and laughing. Now, I've never seen America in such a low place. But on the other hand, you can maybe analyse what's happening, but at the end of the day, you need the young people who are in Columbine and elsewhere to be marching on the streets. You need to be taking up the bigger issues. And maybe as a group of just normal citizens, it's not a way to shout and bawl and scream and march, but we may have to do something of that, because I don't think Britain's moving anywhere. I think we're moving down. You know, from 62, we still haven't found a role in the world. Europe is our role. We've abandoned that. So what happens to Britain next? And the consequences for Scotland, Northern Ireland could be considerable. Yeah, well, I mean, apart from the specific, I mean, it comes back to this general question that we should all be concerned about, that the Scottish Parliament has no power. Because, see, the consent legislation, which we put through in 1998 as part of the Scotland Act, was to allow, you know, consents to be given, agreements to be reached by Westminster. But the Scottish Parliament, the SNP and the Scottish Government are absolutely right to be sticking to the letter of the law. But it comes back to this point that Westminster can do anything to anybody and anything, any institution in Britain. And this is, to me, the real point of interest about whether it's federalism or independence. Do we in here want to be dictated to, it seems an emotive word, by a sovereign Westminster? Because Westminster's sovereignty means not sovereignty of the people, but sovereignty of, and Lord Hailsham, Quentin Hogg, he called it an executive dictatorship. And what he basically meant was that you can't even blame Westminster. You can't even blame the government. You actually can blame the cabinet. And you can blame the Prime Minister. And you know, in this power grab, what you've got is this situation where people are talking about the fact, isn't it terrible, all these powers will go back temporarily to Britain. That's bad, but it's even worse that those powers temporarily will go back to the executive, which is government ministers. Then they, in their great wisdom, will decide what Parliament may discuss. And then further down the line is the Scottish Parliament, who will be left, if there's no progress on these issues, just taking what, you know, comes off the political table. Now, how we make all these issues, I mean, you know, the audience here is different, but if you want, and somebody talked about change. I mean, when I was elected in 1987 to Westminster for the first time, the turnout was about 85%. Now, that really didn't have anything to do with the candidate. It actually had something to do with the fact that an older generation was still voting, and they valued the vote. Now, the same figure for Central Fife, or Glenrothes as it's called now, is in the 60s. So maybe a quarter of the population in my constituency are not voting. And if you look at America, the presidential election coincides with Senate elections and congressional elections. But in the years between presidential elections, the vote can drop to 40 and 45. So half of America who are eligible to vote don't vote. So we think we've got a problem getting through some of these new ideas. One of the bigger problems is that people don't see what we see in democracy. And just to make a point, sorry about this, about populism. Trump, he's not a politician. I mean, he's a businessman. Now, at times, maybe people think that's adventurous. Let him in. But in terms of populism, what we've got to watch is that Erdogan in Turkey, different situation, but he has jailed more journalists than most over the last year or two. But he's moving towards a much more autocratic system. So much so that he's bringing elections forward a year. Because he thinks that the country doesn't need democracy, it needs executive leadership from him. Now, if you look at Trumpism and all the other people that I've talked about, we've talked about a lot of issues layered and layered and layered. But above them all just now is the idea that a lot of people don't see democracy and politics and social progress through the same prism as we do. And people keep saying to me, why did they vote for Trump? Why did they vote for this? Now, that's not really a sensible question, because the sensible question is, what do these people see in democracy that we miss? And a lot of people will look at what we're doing in Europe just now. It is about elites, it is about experts, it is about this, it is about that. And I think at times people, are quite modest. They just want to be treated seriously. And it comes back to, I'm sorry, this guy who doesn't have a wage rise for 10 years, and have nurses who actually might want to use food banks and whatever. Hey, everybody's got to wake their eyes up. If this is the kind of Britain you want, Brexit's just taken my mind off all these big issues. But at the end of the day, we have no idea, I think, where we're going. And the world is so febrile, and Europe's so febrile, that grudge and grievance could dictate a lot of our politics. Big issues.